Look, when Jay signed his contract, the big one was with Beyonce. When he signed that contract, the marriage contract, he got trophies. Now those trophies, trophies came rolling in, buddy. He started getting Grammys left and right, man. I mean, look, if you look at his career,
This guy.
You're gonna let him say that?
Jay was getting Grammys.
he had one.
Exactly.
He had
And
one.
he didn't show up.
No, he has like 20 now.
Hold on.
He had like 18 since he's been down. Look, he had one, bro. Hard Knock Life.
This didn't start as a diss. It didn't come wrapped in a press conference or spelled out in a long rant. It slipped out the way the most dangerous conversations always do. Sideways, half smiling, almost casual. One comment from 50 Cent, one raised eyebrow from the internet. And suddenly a 25-year story people thought was settled got yanked back into the spotlight like it owed somebody money, because when 50 Cent questions something, he's not asking for answers. He's daring people to admit what they've been avoiding. And this time, the question landed on Jay-Z's legacy, the most polished success story hip-hop has ever sold. The hustler to mogul arc. The blueprint. The untouchable narrative that survived beefs, business wars, and decades of scrutiny without so much as a smudge dot until now. The internet didn't just react, it erupted. Clips resurfaced. Old interviews hit different. Lyrics got replayed like confession tapes. And suddenly everyone was asking the same thing at the same time. Have we been hearing the whole story? Or just the version that looks best on a Forbes cover? This makes the Kardashians look like amateur oversharers, because questioning a narrative doesn't mean tearing someone down. It means pulling at the thread and seeing how much of the sweater was stitched for show. And once that thread is visible, you can't unsee it. The moment 50 Cent questioned Jay-Z's long-running narrative, the internet didn't just perk up, it stiffened. That's how you know something touched a nerve. Because in hip-hop, fake drama gets laughed out of the room in minutes. Real discomfort gets handled quietly, with careful language and strategic silence. And suddenly, everybody was choosing their words, like they were walking through glass.j-z single quotes. S-Rise has always been presented as the cleanest success arc in the culture. The hustler who out-hot the streets. The artist who outgrew the genre. The mogul who turned rap lyrics into boardroom leverage. It's a story so polished, it gets taught in business schools and quoted in motivational speeches. But the music industry has never been built on clean stories. It's built on timing, access, alliances, and knowing which doors open quietly while others stay locked forever. That's the space 50 Cent stepped into, not with accusations, but with implication. He didn't say the narrative was fake. He suggested it was edited. And in a culture that prides itself on realness, edited truth hits harder than lies. Because it forces people to ask uncomfortable questions without ever getting a neat answer. What followed wasn't outrage. It was hesitation. Old interviews resurfaced almost immediately. Clips where Jay-Z spoke vaguely about survival. Moments where he referenced moving differently than his peers. Bars that once sounded poetic suddenly read like disclaimers when replayed in a new context. Fans started noticing how carefully certain chapters of the story had always been handled, not erased. Just softened. And the business side of the narrative came under the microscope next. Partnerships that ended quietly. Rivals who disappeared while Jay-Z ascended untouched. Moments when industry shakeups took down entire camps but somehow left him insulated. None of this was framed as wrongdoing. It was framed as positioning. The kind of positioning that doesn't happen by accident and doesn't get discussed openly because it destabilizes. The fantasy of merit-only success, that's where the conversation got tense. Supporters rushed in with receipts, accolades, achievements,
Cultural impact, Grammys, billion-dollar deals.
influence that reshaped the genre forever. And all of that is real. But defenders weren't answering the question being raised. They were defending the outcome, not the process. Nobody was denying Jay-Z's greatness. People were questioning whether greatness at that level is ever achieved alone. The internet hates that question because it messes with aspiration. If the story isn't purely about hustle and genius, then success starts looking less predictable, less fair, less controllable. And for fans who built their own dreams on the idea of a flawless blueprint, that's unsettling. Industry insiders reacted in a way that raised eyebrows. Not with loud denials, not with aggressive rebuttals, but with vague reminders about respecting legacies and not rewriting history. Those statements sound noble, but they also function as pressure valves. When history is solid, it doesn't need guarding. When it's fragile, it gets protected by tone policing. 50 Cent leaned into that silence without touching it. He didn't escalate. He didn't clarify. He let the vacuum do the work. Because silence in entertainment isn't empty, it's loud. And the longer no one rushed to shut the conversation down, the more people started wondering why. That's when the idea of a 25-year narrative really took shape. Not a secret file, not a hidden crime. A story arc that's been refined over decades to be inspirational, exportable, and controversy-proof. A narrative strong enough to survive beefs, betrayals, and industry collapses without ever being directly challenged at the foundation. Until someone asked whether it was complete, hip-hop commentators split down the middle. Some argued that questioning Jay-Z's story was disrespectful, even dangerous. They warned that tearing down icons only hurts the culture. Others fired back that culture doesn't grow by freezing legends in amber. That interrogation isn't disrespect, it's tradition. Hip-hop was built by questioning power, not protecting it, and that's when this stopped being about two rappers. It became about who gets to be untouchable, because Jay-Z isn't just a person, he's a symbol. A proof of concept for corporate rap success. A bridge between street credibility and elite approval. And symbols are protected not just by fans, but by systems that benefit from their stability. Questioning the symbol introduces risk, and industries hate risk more than they hate controversy. What made this moment dangerous wasn't the suggestion itself. It was how many people immediately recognized it without needing it spelled out. The reaction had a familiarity to it, like hearing an inside joke from across the room and realizing you weren't supposed to laugh. In public, 50 Cent's role in all of this was classic. He didn't present himself as a whistleblower. He acted like a mirror. He pointed and let everyone decide what they were looking at. That's his real power. He forces conversations without owning them, then watches as the audience fills in the blanks with their own experiences of gatekeeping. Favoritism and selective memory, Jay-Z remained silent. And that silence became a Rorschach test. To some, it was composure. To others, it was calculation. To many, it was proof that engaging would only legitimize a conversation better handled indirectly. Silence can be dignity or a strategy, and the fact that both interpretations make sense is exactly the problem. By the end of this phase, the internet wasn't demanding answers anymore. It was recalibrating expectations. People started acknowledging that success stories are curated for consumption. That inspiration often requires simplification. That complexity gets trimmed out, not because it's false, but because it's inconvenient. This wasn't a takedown. It was a permission slip. Permission to say legacies are shaped, not just earned. Permission to question without accusing. Permission to admit that power moves quietly while mythology makes noise. And once that permission exists, the story doesn't stay contained. It spreads outward, touching other narratives, other icons, other moments people were told not to revisit. Once that door cracked open, the conversation didn't just continue, it expanded. What began as a question about one legacy turned into a wider audit of how power actually moves in hip-hop. And the speed of that shift told you everything. This wasn't curiosity. This was recognition. People weren't discovering new information. They were connecting familiar dots they'd been trained to keep separate. Memes were the first wave. Because humor is how the internet checks if it's allowed to talk about something. Old Jay-Z photos resurfaced with captions dripping in irony. Clips from interviews got stitched side by side with 50 Cent smirking like he knew the punchline before the joke landed. Jabs flew, but they weren't reckless. They were precise. The jokes didn't say anything new. They asked the same question in louder fonts. Then came the commentary class, and this is where the temperature really changed. Influencers, podcasters, and culture critics suddenly started speaking in half sentences. It's complicated. There's context. We shouldn't oversimplify success. Those phrases sound responsible, but they also signal caution. If the story were baseless, the reaction would have been dismissal. Instead, it was management. Celebrity responses followed a familiar pattern: selective engagement. Some jumped in with vague messages about respecting elders and protecting legacies. Others went completely silent, the kind of silence that only appears when the topic sits too close to shared interests. In an industry built on noise, coordinated quiet is its own form of communication, and the internet clocked it instantly. Fans started pulling timelines, like they were assembling a puzzle they'd seen before but never laid out fully. Who benefited when certain movements stalled? Who survived industry earthquakes untouched? Who seemed to glide through moments that wrecked entire camps? Again, nobody was alleging wrongdoing. They were questioning infrastructure, the hidden scaffolding that keeps some people standing while others fall. This is where the conversation leveled up. It stopped being "what did Jay-Z do?" and became "how does the system work?" Because if success at the highest level were only about talent and grind, the outcomes wouldn't look so consistent. There wouldn't be such a clear divide between who gets protected and who gets exposed. There wouldn't be so many stories that end abruptly for some while others continue. Uninterrupted, 50 Cent has always been fluent in that reality. He's seen artists erased, narratives rewritten, and enemies rehabilitated overnight. He knows how quickly truth becomes inconvenient when it threatens stability. So when he questioned the narrative,
He wasn't accusing a person. He was pressing on the pressure points of an industry that prefers myths to mechanics. Supporters of Jay-Z came out swinging with achievements.
and rightly so. Grammys, global influence, business acumen that changed the ceiling for rappers forever. None of that disappeared. But again, that wasn't the argument. The pushback was about the process, not the prize. About whether the journey has been told in full, or edited down to a version that sells best. That nuance didn't survive long in comment sections. Critics argued that no, legacy should be above scrutiny, especially in a culture born from questioning power. Defenders warned that tearing down icons hurts the culture and feeds negativity. Both sides were talking past each other. One side was defending respect. The other was defending curiosity. And curiosity, once ignited, doesn't go back to sleep. What really poured gasoline on the situation was the absence of a clean rebuttal. No direct, that's false. No clear, here's the context. Just reminders to be careful, respectful, and mindful. That kind of response doesn't shut down questions. It validates them. It tells the audience there's something delicate being handled. Meanwhile, 50 Cent did the most disruptive thing possible. Nothing. No clarification. No doubling down. No, let me explain. He let the internet argue itself into exhaustion. That restraint made his original implication feel heavier. If it were clout chasing, he would have escalated. If it were empty provocation, he would have chased the moment. Instead, he let the moment outgrow him. And it did. Think pieces started popping up everywhere. Long threads about how success stories are curated for mass consumption. Essays about how inspiration requires simplification and simplification requires omission. Discussions about how industries reward proximity as much as performance. Jay-Z stayed at the center, but the scope widened far beyond him. This wasn't about a man anymore. It was about myth-making. For younger artists watching, the lesson landed quietly but firmly. Talent matters. Hustle matters. But so do access, timing, and alliances. Those truths don't invalidate success, they contextualize it. And context can be uncomfortable when it threatens the idea that the path is equally open to everyone. As the debate raged, one thing became clear. The industry wasn't shocked by the question. It was shocked that the question went viral. These conversations had existed in private rooms for years. What changed was visibility. Once the audience started seeing the seams, pretending they weren't there became harder. Jay-Z's silence continued to function like a blank canvas. To some, it was class, the refusal to dignify noise. To others, it was strategy, avoiding a discussion that can't be won without opening doors better left closed. Both interpretations gained traction, and that ambiguity kept the conversation alive. The internet moved on to other topics. As it always does, But this one didn't vanish. It settled, like a low hum in the background. Because stories about power don't end, they pause. They wait for the next moment, the next comment, the next reminder that myths are maintained through repetition. Not interrogation. By the time the conversation reached its final stage, it stopped sounding like a scandal and started behaving like a reckoning with mythology. Not a takedown. Not a cancellation. A quiet recalibration. This is the phase where nobody's yelling anymore, because yelling isn't necessary. The question has already landed, and now the industry is deciding how to live with it sitting in the room. Jay-Z's legacy didn't wobble publicly. No press conference. No emergency statements. No frantic image control. And that steadiness told its own story. Power doesn't rush to explain itself. It waits. It lets the noise burn out while momentum continues uninterrupted. To supporters, that's composure. To skeptics, it's insulation. To everyone else, it's a reminder that some positions are built to absorb doubt without showing damage. That realization mattered more than any single claim, because what changed wasn't the resume. It was the tone around it. Conversations that once sounded reverent started sounding analytical. Praise came with qualifiers. Achievements were still celebrated, but with context attached. Regardless of how you feel. Even if parts of the story are layered, however you interpret the rise. Those phrases didn't exist in this volume before. That's how narratives evolve, not through explosions, but through footnotes. The most interesting shift was how quickly people accepted that two things could be true at once. Jay-Z could be brilliant, visionary, and transformative, and the story of his ascent could still be curated. Not fake, curated, shaped for inspiration, export, and stability. That idea doesn't destroy a legacy. It humanizes it. But humanization feels threatening in an industry that sells aspiration as a product. 50 Cent's role in this became clearer in hindsight. He wasn't positioning himself as a truth crusader. He didn't demand accountability or offer a verdict. He acted like what he's always been in hip-hop, a stress test. Someone who pokes at the seams just to see which ones are structural and which ones are decorative. He didn't need to win the argument. He needed to make the silence visible, and the silence was visible. Inside the industry, the response wasn't outrage. It was containment. Conversations migrated off timelines into private chats. Public takes softened. The volume dropped. That doesn't mean the question disappeared. It means it found a safer place to live, behind closed doors where narratives are negotiated instead of debated. That's how power protects itself without ever announcing that it's protecting anything. For younger artists and fans, the impact landed differently. This wasn't about picking sides. It was about seeing the machinery, about realizing that success stories are edited for mass consumption. That access matters. That proximity is currency. That talent is essential but rarely sufficient on its own. Those lessons usually get learned quietly and painfully. This time, they trended. The irony is that none of this erased Jay-Z's accomplishments. Hustle still mattered. Vision still mattered. Work still mattered. What cracked was the illusion that those things operate alone. They never have. Pretending they do is how industries maintain the idea that the path is equally open to everyone. Even when the evidence suggests otherwise. As attention inevitably shifted to the next viral distraction, because it always does. This story didn't vanish. It settled, like sediment at the bottom of a glass. Not loud enough to dominate timelines, but present enough to resurface whenever the conversation turns to power, legacy, and who gets protected when narratives collide. Jay-Z continued moving exactly as expected. Deals announced. Appearances made. Influence intact. That continuity itself became part of the takeaway. Stability is a privilege. It signals that whatever questions exist, they aren't disruptive enough to alter momentum. That's not an accusation. It's an observation. An observation is what this entire moment was about. What lingered most was the shift in how people framed future discussions. Less hero worship. More analysis. Less absolutism. More context. That's not a culture tearing itself apart. It's a culture maturing. Cultures stagnate when their icons are untouchable. They grow when they can be examined without collapsing. This wasn't about declaring anyone over. That framing misses the point entirely. Nothing ended here. Something adjusted. The myth didn't die. It became flexible. And flexible myths are more resilient than rigid ones, because they can absorb doubt without shattering doubt. In that sense, this wasn't an expose. It was a recalibration. A reminder that legacies aren't just built, they're maintained, curated, protected, negotiated over time. That doesn't make them lies. It makes them human constructions operating inside systems that reward certain behaviors and discourage others. The most telling outcome was how quickly people tried to shut the conversation down without addressing it directly. Calls for respect, warnings about tearing down our own, appeals to unity. Those arguments sound noble, but they often function as brakes. Culture doesn't move forward by refusing to ask questions. It moves forward by surviving them. Hip-hop. A culture born from interrogation and truth-telling doesn't lose strength by questioning power. It loses strength by pretending power doesn't exist. What 50 Cent ultimately did wasn't expose a document or topple a titan. He shifted the lens. He reminded everyone that stories at the top are rarely complete, that success is rarely solitary, and that silence is rarely accidental. He pointed, and in an industry fluent in implication, pointing is often enough. This chapter didn't end with answers. It ended with awareness. The kind that doesn't dominate headlines but changes how people listen. The kind that sits in the back of your mind the next time you hear a perfectly polished origin story and wonder what didn't make the final cut. If you're still here, then you didn't just watch a video. You sat through a legacy conversation most people are scared to have out loud. Now, don't ghost the comments like you didn't feel that tension. Drop your take below. Was 50 Cent just trolling the internet for sport? Or did he crack open a narrative everyone quietly accepted without questioning? Is examining a legacy disrespectful, or is it the most hip-hop thing you can do? Say it plainly. No fence-sitting, no vague emojis. Explain your logic, and while you're down there, smash that like button like it's been protecting secrets for 25 years and finally slipped up. Likes tell the algorithm this conversation matters. And trust me, the algorithm loves uncomfortable truth more than polite silence. If this made you think, hit like. If it annoyed you, hit like harder. If it made you side-eye a few old interviews, congratulations, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Hit subscribe too. Because stories like this don't end when the video cuts. They resurface. They evolve. They come back louder when someone else asks the same question from a different angle. While other channels chase headlines and play it safe, we break down the power moves, the silence, and the narratives nobody explains. Turn on notifications so you're early. Not catching up through screenshots.